Welcome to our posts. Today, we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. The food is bad. My son has some special needs and is a reluctant reader and writer. He has never before taken initiative to read or write on his own. He is so enthusiastic about lots of other parts of learning. He is in art and speech and has an EAP. He is, however, very gifted at finding the loophole in everything. It's entertaining and exasperating, and sometimes I'm just in awe. I made him lunch today, some chicken, rice, fresh fruit, and some snap peas, all things he normally likes. I thought it was a nice lunch. While he was eating, I had to make a call to schedule an appointment. He said, "I don't like this. This tastes bad. I want something else. I don't want this for lunch." Since I was on the phone, I said, "Eat what you can, please. I'm on the phone and I don't want to hear you complain about your lunch again." He was very quiet for the next few minutes as I finished up my call. Then he handed me a piece of paper. My kid, who has never wanted to read or write, who I often have to sit with and do it with him the entire time, wrote for the first time on his own. It was a passive-aggressive note. He wrote for the first time to make a complaint. The note said, "FOD is bad." I'm really proud and a little offended, but mostly proud. And, technically, I had not heard him complain about his lunch again, so. I am not able to attach a photo of the note here, but I hung it on the fridge and told him I was very proud of him for writing it all by himself. Next story. I need a doctor's note to work from home for more than 2 days while I have an unidentified, presumably contagious illness. If you insist. It's a tale as old as capitalism. My job, which, to be fair, I freaking adore working at and am so grateful for and happy at, requires a doctor's note because I've been sick and working from home for 2 days. Now, I haven't just had a minor cold or flu. Several days ago, I came down with the worst cold flu symptoms you can imagine, and then things starting going downhill from there. It got to the point where I have now been to the 2 days in a row because of tonsillitis and excruciating pain brought on by swallowing tiny sips of water. It's not great, and despite a whole battery of swabs and tests, the doctors don't know what the underlying bacteria or virus causing these symptoms is. Obviously, there's no way in hell I want to infect my coworkers with this plague, so I told HR that I would be working from home until I'm feeling better, since my job can be done 100% remotely. They hit me back with the ever-famous, "If you need to work from home for more than 2 days in a week, you'll need a doctor's note since it's against policy." My first instinct was to just go into work looking, sounding, and feeling like death warmed up. But I don't want to infect my colleagues, and B, I legitimately believe that I would pass out on my walk to work and would have to be taken to the hospital yet again. Instead, I spoke to the doctor from earlier, this evening, my second visit in as many days. I asked him how long he thought I should stay away from work from home, and then told him I needed a note so I could stay home. He had a brief flash of vaguely furious, "What the F?" cross his face at the ideas that my job would force someone as sick as I am to come in and risk the health of those around me, then assured me he would write the note. I was thinking it would just be a basic Lulu Gingerspiss should continue to work from home until the end of the week. Nah, bro came through for me. He wrote a note saying that I should be off of work for at minimum another week, then added the piece de resistance as his last line. Infectious disease requires more time than 2 days to improve. Next story. Cop keeps interrogating me on where I'm coming from. My pleasure. Disclaimer, I am a woman and was polite otherwise. Your mileage may vary. When I was younger, I would visit natural parks. One time as I was driving home, a police officer pulled me over for alcohol testing. I politely complied, yet the officer must have thought I was peddling drugs or something because he asked for a further drug test and started interrogating me. I told him that I came from the natural park, yet he was asking me the same question on repeat. Finally, I kept a cordial demeanor, imagining myself as if I were talking to a coworker and with the appropriate delivery. I went on a long monologue on how I enjoyed visiting natural parks, which road I took there, where I stopped for petrol, how much I paid for petrol, where I parked, which track I walked on, when did I decide to turn back on the track, which birds I saw on the track, the weather at the park, and so on. Finally, after a minute, he told me to shush and then let me go after the drug test came clear. I think some cops would have gotten more angry by this behavior, but what worked for me was my genuine delivery. Next story. Boss can't hire with crappy wages, so demotes me instead. Okay, but it'll cost you £1 million. A few years ago, I worked at a janky, 2-bit company. The boss thought he was Billy Big Bollocks and God's gift simultaneously. He had such a big head, I'm surprised he could get through doorways. He used to drink beer at his desk for lunch and would often arrive at work late. He was also an insufferable muscle bro and walked around as if carrying rolls of carpet under each arm. Prick. A few months into my time there, the company starts winning large orders, so he asks me to set up a small-scale production line to increase capacity and tells me the new hire will be situated there. I design it, set it up, test it all works, and I'm feeling a sense of pride with what I've accomplished. It worked like a dream. I was confident it would work really well for the new hire. Because I'm an engineer by trade, everything was perfect and only I knew how to fix the broken crap. Nobody else asked how it worked before making some very detrimental decisions. A while later, there was an issue. He couldn't hire anyone willing to accept such a crappy wage and boring work. So Billy Big Bollocks had a bright idea to demote me and make me governor of my creation. No way, not for £9K less. I immediately started job hunting and I told him, if that's your final offer, regard tomorrow as my final day. He panics that he's committed the company to a £1M order due for shipping in 3 days' time. During his alcohol-fueled panic, he tells me to write up highly detailed technical manuals and processes for my replacement. The production line included some precise handwork. Piss off, I can't do that in 1 day. He also didn't specify what they should contain, and considering I had no help from him with this project, just complaints, I thought F it. So sure, he got his manuals. I created Word documents with convincing titles like Technical Manual Product Version 2.0 and how to do this precise task. Inside the documents were, for example, the surprised Pikachu face and Bubbles from Trailer Park Boys looking lost. Then below, just one line of text reading, "This manual contains all the information I could find or was given." The file sizes would also indicate a lot of text was contained within thanks to the images. Therefore, at face value, they looked legitimate. I saved them to my laptop in an equally legitimate-looking folder that afternoon. Early the next morning, I came to work to collect my belongings and do some handovers, and found the laptop had vanished. I said my goodbyes to my colleagues and looked over to see him looking incensed with a beer in one hand. He was so angry he didn't look up from his desk. A friend told me later that the company missed the production deadline despite him working 12-hour days to try to catch up. Apparently, the client was extremely F off. Don't screw over good people. Prick. Next story. People don't understand why you're leaving early. I was working for a small-ish company, about 60 employees across several locations. Its support for both hardware laptops, phones, and software. When I was hired just under 9 years ago, it was verbally agreed that instead of clocking any callouts as overtime, I would just take the time in lieu. Callouts were always minimal, and there were never any issues with me taking the time here and here to make up for it. Any calls in the middle of the night were quickly resolved, and I had no problem getting back to sleep. Appointments in the middle of the day were fine because of the additional hours from whenever. This worked well for almost my entire time there. I also always started early, just depending on when I left the house, got into the office, got my coffee. Could have been anywhere between 5 and 30 minutes because I would leave the house earlier so as not to wake the family if school was off that day. I didn't care at that point. It never bothered me. They got free time from me. But again, I did not care because honestly, what else did I have to do? It was a great job until it wasn't. One weekend I was working on some hardware maintenance, cleaning up wiring, Ethernet, plugs, installing a new UPS that took me the better part of Sunday to complete 6-8 hours. This was understood, approved in advance, and appreciated. The following week I decided to start burning those extra hours up. I still came in early as I had done for years, but started leaving an hour early from my regular end time every day if nothing was going on. This is important if something needed done. I got it done. I was reachable via email until early evening, and phone pretty much 24/7. This particular week was slow, so I had nothing going on. I left an hour early for the first 4 days. On Friday, my boss comes to me and gently says, "People notice that you've been leaving early this week. I'd like you to make sure you stay in your office until the scheduled end of day in case someone needs you." I explained to him that I was burning up blue days, and he just reiterated that it looks bad to others. Seriously, you can't tell the others that I work my 40 hours a week, just not at the same time as them. Fine. Cue the malicious compliance. I immediately submitted 4 hours of overtime for the hours that I didn't take in lieu. I still showed up at the office at whatever time I got there, but did not start any work until 8 a.m. If asked, I would say, "Sure, 8 a.m. start time." If I got called outside of office hours, depending on how long I spent on the issue, I logged it as overtime. User calls me at 7 p.m. to ask a question. I answer him in 30 seconds, 1 hour out. When my boss then started to ask, "How come you're submitting all of this overtime?" I responded with a simple, "Some people don't understand or like me taking lieu time, so I need to claim it as overtime since I am at my desk from 8-4. Because I wasn't available at his beck and call, it ended up costing them more money. 95% of my job could be done from home because of full remote access, but that stupid old school mentality means that people in the office need to see you at your desk all day long. I left the company very shortly after that for a much better paying job with full work from home. Know your worth. Next story. African exchange student. Here's my all-time favorite malicious compliance story. I studied history in Germany, and while there, an African exchange student enrolled as well. He had a very thick accent and had quite a lot of trouble putting his thoughts to paper. So when an assignment was due, he asked the elderly professor if he could write the assignment in English, where he had way more ease expressing himself. The elderly professor didn't want to admit that his English was rather bad, so instead, he referenced the university guidelines that stipulated that except for language studies, all assignments were to be written in either German or Latin. Little did the professor know that the African exchange student was in fact schooled in a Jesuit monastery. So he did turn in the assignment in perfect Latin. Since the professor had specialized in modern history, he needed the help of a Latin professor to grade the assignment. The university guidelines have been amended a year later. Assignments in Latin are only acceptable for those studying Latin anymore. Disclaimer, not a native speaker in English. Next story. Armored delivery driver finds out they are not above the law. I worked for a dispensary and we handled a lot of cash, so every morning and sometimes 2-3 times throughout the day, an armored van would arrive and deliver change or pick up the safe contents. As a medical dispensary, we had a lot of patients who used the handicapped parking spots. There were only 3 for the whole building, yet the morning armored truck driver would always be sure to pull his van up sideways across all 3 spots. The morning delivery took the longest, which often meant customers would arrive and not be able to use those parking spots. After asking the driver not to do this anymore, I was told to call his boss if I had a problem. His boss said if I had a problem, to handle it myself. So I did. The parking enforcement sent 2 people to our location, and when he pulled his van into place as usual across all 3 spots, they pulled an enforcement car up on either side of him and wrote him a total of 5 infractions. Shortly after we switched companies, which was probably unrelated, but I secretly think it was the small shame they felt inside after being jerks about something we all know better than to do ourselves. Next story. Fine then, I'll just take paternity leave. Many years ago, I was a sales manager for the now defunct Circuit City. My wife and I were expecting our first child. This was in 1999. My wife was leaving her place of employment as she was planning on staying home with our daughter once she was born. Being our first child, I wanted to be home for a little while at the beginning. As I was talking to my store manager to arrange having some time off when my daughter was born, I asked for a week off. I was met with opposition and told I could only have 2 days off because we don't have extra management coverage. Yet we somehow cover people's vacations. This was absolutely ridiculous, and luckily I had done my homework. The way the FMLA Family Medical Leave Act law is written, the parents can take up to 12 weeks of maternity-paternity leave, and their job is guaranteed to be waiting for them when they return. I believe this is meant to be combined between the parents, but since my wife was leaving her job permanently and not taking maternity leave, that left 12 weeks available for me to take. Paternity leave is rarely ever done, because it is most often unpaid leave. I, however, had plenty of saved up vacation and sick time. So, I informed the store manager that I would be filing for paternity leave under FMLA and would in fact be taking 12 weeks off and would be using my saved to cover my income. He tried to argue with me, but I told him he should probably go contact HR. He returned later that day and sheepishly asked me if I would accept the week I originally asked for. I told him that I would accept 2 weeks or 12 and that the choice was his. I ended up with 2 weeks, and that store manager learned that, though I was young at the time, I wasn't going to be pushed around, and that reasonable requests should be reasonably accepted. Next story. Calling me on a day off. Cha-ching? This happened well over a year ago, but as a unionized employee, I get every third Friday off. On my day off, I am playing some video games and get a text from the boss. I know it's your day off, but whatever, that's easy to ignore. But then I get a second text. And after I ignore that, I get a call. Boss, I know it's your day off, but our phones are down. Me, no worries, I'll handle it. We hang up and I call our phone provider. I'm the it and the contact there, and this isn't my first call ever to them, so I literally have their service department saved in my phone. I call, I register the problem, and they say they'll look into it. I provide them my boss name and extension, and to call him when it's fixed. I then call my boss back and let him know that they'll call him ASAP. But now for the malicious compliance bit. Our contract stipulates a minimum call-in of 4 hours, meaning that you cannot pay me less than 4 hours for a day unless it is by my own choosing. If you call me in for an hour and send me home, I get 4 hours of pay. But wait, there's more. We also have an overtime clause that pays OT at 150%. And lastly, we have a clause that says all OT must be approved by the boss, or else it is one toil time off in lieu, which you can take at a 1 ration, i.e., if I decide that the weekend is a good time for server updates, I don't need to ask for approval, but my 2 hours of work only translate to 2 hours of paid time off elsewhere. Combine all this in one delightful batch and you get a 10-minute call that results in 6 hours of banked time off. I went right back to my video games, filled out my time sheet the week after, and said, I know it's your day off, but is implied consent for overtime. Minimum call-out of 4 hours at 150% is 6 hours. Almost an entire day off with pay in exchange for a 10-minute call. Thank I owe you very much. Bonus. Guess who has 2 thumbs and has since then never been called on his day off? This unionized guy. Hint, get unionized. Fight back. Edit. Didn't think this would take off like this. Of course, anyone saying this isn't malicious is right. Sadly, we live in a world where a lot of people are expected to work beyond their scope. And while my experience should be normal, it really isn't for a lot of people. The expectation my boss had, I presume, is that I'd write the 15 minutes down. We write our time in blocks of 15 and be content with that. We all deserve to be left alone during our time off and B, to be compensated and compensated well if we are asked to give up time off to do a work thing. You work to live after all, not the other way around. To those asking what union I'm with, I'm not in a special union. It's just a union with experience with office jobs. If you're interested in joining a union and don't know where to start, call any local union. A nurses' or plumbers' union will gladly point you to the right place if they can't help you themselves. More unionized workers are good for everyone, because we as a working class need to understand that we are all in this together. Next story. If you have a problem, it better be a 15-minute problem. My husband told me a story yesterday about his act of malicious compliance that happened about a decade ago. In a previous job, he worked 8-4 in an office. Many of his colleagues worked 9-5, so they were still working when he was leaving. When he was about to leave, he'd usually be asked a technical question or asked to quickly glance over something by another member of staff. This was rarely quick and usually had him standing around for a further 10 minutes, which, on a regular basis, starts to add up. One day, his manager was going over the monthly timesheets and asked my husband why he'd added 10 minutes on 5 days across past month. Bear in mind, flexi time was allowed. My husband explained the situation, referring to the specific problems he was asked to deal with on each of those 5 days. The manager told him that the company only works in 15-minute segments, so he can't put down 10 minutes. It would have to be 15 minutes. However, we can't round it up because that's dishonest, he said, so just bear it in mind for next time. This was in front of the rest of the office. That very same week, my husband signs out of his computer at 4 p.m. Just before he leaves, the manager asks him to explain some of the particulars in an email he'd received from a contractor. My husband asks, "How long will it take?" The manager replies, "Just 5 minutes." My husband then says, "Unless it's a 15-minute problem, I'll have to look at it tomorrow. Is it a 15-minute problem?" His manager turns red and awkwardly says it's not. My husband respectfully states that he will put it at the top of his to-do list the following morning and leaves. One of his colleagues texted him just after 5 and said there was an awkward silence after he'd left, and when the manager eventually got up and left to do something, they all burst out laughing. Edit. Some people were asking about wage theft. He eventually had the 15 minutes added back on after the policy revealed that he could round it up if it was a task that took 7.5 minutes or more, and down if it wasn't. The manager seemed genuinely unaware of this when it was raised. He was salaried, so he wasn't concerned about losing income, just about losing flexi time that could have helped him put if something unprecedented happened, like being stuck in traffic one day. I think managers should spend a certain amount of time a week looking over their own policies, or at least find out what they are before making any kind of instruction. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share, and subscribe the channel. Our posts